How's it going, and welcome back to my channel. In this video I'm going to be making the Moon Knight Scarab compass piece from the Disney Plus show Moon Knight. The way that I'm going to go about making the Scarab is to 3D print it in resin. Resin printers can get a lot more detail. The file I'm using can be found at Do3D. It is a paid file, but it is a highly accurate file, and I think it's worth the money. Especially if you go to Do3D on any sort of holiday, they have fantastic deals all the time. After I purchased the files, I took all of them and dropped them into Lychee Slicer all at once. I'm going to be printing this on the Elegoo Saturn S, so I have all of my Lychee settings set up for that printer. I'm going to begin moving the files away from each other. There is 4 separate files in here, and obviously I don't want them to all intersect with each other. The nice part about resin printers is that you can print multiple things at the same time, and as long as they're not any taller, they don't take any longer, unlike a regular FDM printer. I'm going to begin orienting all of these at an angle so that excess resin can run off. And I'll use the magic tool to add supports everywhere that I think I need it. Notice that I disabled the auto rotation when using the magic tool. This is because I had already oriented these the way that I wanted to, and I didn't want Lychee to turn them so that a highly detailed piece would then become face down and ruin some of that detail. And then I like to go back in and add some manual supports for certain details. I'll add 1 or 2 strong supports just to make sure that the piece doesn't fall off. And I'll add some light supports if there's areas that I think need more detail underneath. Generally, very detailed pieces will not have much detail underneath where the resin supports connect. Lychee has this checkerboard feature that allows you to see where it thinks it might need supports. Now, you're not going to need supports along that entire area, but it might be a good idea, and you likely will lose detail. For example, that large flat piece that's checkerboarded all the way across was very bumpy when the print actually came out. Luckily, it's just the bottom of the Scarab, so it's not a big deal to me, but it is something to keep in mind. Once I feel like I have enough manual supports, I'll go through and optimize those supports. This allows branching so that not every single support goes from the part all the way to the bed. Certain supports can start as 1, split out to 3, 5, and so on. And then I'll also brace the supports. This is all those little cross beams that you see between the different support pieces. The magic tool will add some of these in already, but if you add more supports, you're going to want to add this feature if that's something that you want to have on the supports that you created. After I got my raft and all my support settings set up the way that I wanted to, I just reorient them slightly on the bed to make sure they're in a position that I like, and I export. After a few hours, my print was done, and I was ready to take it off the bed. Again, I'm using the new Elegoo Saturn S, and it is a fantastic resin printer. I'm using Elegoo's normal gray resin. I'll usually take my bed and turn it sideways and let all the excess resin drip off. A lot of excess resin had pooled up in these parts. I have the Elegoo Mercury Wash and Cure Station bundle. This makes cleaning up your resin 3D prints so much easier. Inside the wash station, I have 99% isopropyl alcohol to make sure that all these pieces get washed very thoroughly. The nice part about using this wash and cure station is you can just take the print while it's still on the bed and put it right in the wash station, and it washes it as is. Now I can take the build plate off, set it on my table, and just let all of that isopropyl alcohol evaporate off. It's a pretty quick process. Once it's all dry and clean, I can now begin scraping these pieces off of my build plate. These pieces came off pretty easy the way that I sliced them, especially with a raft. Now this piece can definitely be printed on an FDM 3D printer, but I am telling you, you're not going to get any detail like this out of an FDM printer. These resin printers are absolutely awesome. Now there is a debate out there as to whether or not you should cure your pieces before you remove the supports or after you remove the supports. I like to remove my supports before I cure these pieces. That way, it's much easier to get the supports off and I don't worry about breaking the piece. Although with these wings on the Scarab, I was very gentle because they are very thin. And it's not strong yet because we have not cured this piece yet. Now I can simply set these on the circular turntable inside the cure station, and in just a few minutes these pieces will be completely cured and ready to go. I did a test fit and I noticed that the pegs weren't perfectly fitting inside of everything, so I knew I was going to have to sand this a little bit. I decided to take the Scarab over to the sink and do a wet sand with 600 grit and then a little bit of 2000 grit. I was trying to get this nice and smooth. As you can see now, the piece fits together brilliantly. I was having some debate with myself as to how I wanted to finish these pieces. I've used gold spray paint before, like on the Indiana Jones idol, and it looks pretty good. But for this, I wanted to test out using rub and buff. Now, I do think this is a good technique, even for a piece like this. However, I did not prime these at all. I'm using rub and buff straight on the raw print, and it didn't adhere as well as I would have preferred. So I would recommend hitting these with some sprayable primer just to make sure that your piece is ready and has a nice, clean, consistent surface. There were certain areas where the rub and buff didn't want to bond with the raw resin print. Some of these very detailed areas, like on the wings, I needed to use a brush to get in there and make sure that every crevice and crack had the gold rub and buff on it. You can see some of the areas on this print where the rub and buff is not a consistent texture. This is because I didn't prime it. Now that I finished rubbing it, it was time to buff it out. I just used a cut up piece of an old t-shirt. I go through all the areas and surfaces and just make sure that everything's rubbed down nice. And I also like to give it about a day when I'm using something like rub and buff to make sure the rub and buff sets properly, before adding any other paints or anything like that. The Scarab is gold, but it's also 2 shades of blue and black. I wanted to start with the black because I thought that I could take some acrylic paint, water it down, and then do a wash over the piece and allow the watered down acrylic black to soak into all the hieroglyphs and the different detail parts. However, because I used rub and buff and not spray paint, the black paint really wanted to adhere to that rub and buff and it wasn't wiping away easily, even though I'd watered it down. I needed to use some isopropyl alcohol to be able to clean it up. You can use isopropyl alcohol or nail polish remover to be able to remove that acrylic paint right back off. I set that piece aside and grabbed the tiniest brush that I could find and started working on that blue. Now the wings have dark blue, and the middle of the Scarab piece has dark blue and a little bit of a lighter blue. I grabbed the smallest brush I could find, allowed the acrylic paint just to sit right there on the tip of the brush, and slowly, meticulously went across and painted this entire thing. This was a long process and I would not want to have to do it again. For areas where the acrylic paint is spilling over into areas that I don't want it to get, I just use my isopropyl alcohol and dip a Q-tip in it, and then wipe it over the surface. And this removes that acrylic paint quite easily. Ultimately, I felt like I needed to go back through with some gold acrylic paint and paint over some of the gold areas just to bring some of that shine and brightness back, because I really felt like these acrylics dulled it down. I went back through with that small brush to try to do the black areas as well. Once I finished all of it up, I just set it aside to make sure that it was all nice and dry, and then it was time to assemble. This thing goes together easy. You just take the 2 pegs, stick them through the wings, through the bottom, and it's in. You could always glue it down if you wanted to make sure that it stays together, but I have such a tight, snug fit that I didn't even bother doing that. If I was to do this project again, I would take that raw print, sand it just like I did, I would put a layer of primer down, then I would spray gold spray paint, then I would do the acrylics that I did, and then maybe go back through at the end with my gold rub and buff to add extra shine to certain areas of the gold. I hope you found this video helpful. If you have any questions, post them in the comments. This was a relatively quick project, especially with the resin printer. There was not much finishing work that needed to be done at all. After I rub and buffed it, I let it sit for a few days, but I definitely probably could have done this entire project in a day, maybe 2. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.